It started with one photo. A single image leaked online. Judge Hannah Dugan, handcuffed, eyes down, flanked by agents. No context, no explanation, just raw, viral controversy. Within hours, it was everywhere. News banners, political podcasts, talk show panels. And just like that, the hearing was set. But what happened inside that Capitol chamber was far bigger than one arrest. Kash Patel, the new face of federal law enforcement, didn't just show up to defend his agency. He came prepared to expose something much deeper. By the end of the day, Senator Chris Van Hollen wasn't asking questions. He was dodging them. Stay with us, because what unfolds in this room will flip the script on everything the media told you. And before we begin, let us know where you're watching from and hit subscribe so you don't miss this moment. The photo hit social media at 6:14 a.m. An anonymous X account with fewer than 200 followers posted it first. A judge in federal custody. No caption, no official release, just chaos. Within 20 minutes, cable news picked it up. 30 minutes later, Senator Chris Van Hollen was on a morning news circuit, calling the image disturbing, un-American, and evidence of institutional rot. By noon, the Senate Oversight Committee had been summoned into emergency session. The topic: the conduct of the FBI under the leadership of Director Kash Patel. Kash didn't flinch. He walked into the chamber calmly, even as reporters shouted questions that echoed off the marble. He wore a navy suit, a subdued American flag pin on his lapel, and carried a thin black folder. Inside, the tension was thicker than the silence. The room was full but quiet. No one wanted to make eye contact. Cameras were rolling. Van Hollen, already seated at the center of the semicircle, didn't even glance up as Patel took his seat. The first words came not from Van Hollen, but from Senator Durbin. "We've all seen the image," Durbin said flatly. A federal judge detained by federal agents. No charges announced, no official statement. "Director Patel, what the hell is going on?" Kash opened his folder slowly, then shut it again without pulling out a single page. "What you saw was the end of a long investigation," he said. "Not the beginning." A murmur ran through the room. Durbin leaned in. "Are you telling us this was sanctioned?" "I'm telling you," Patel said, his voice even, "that no one, not judges, not senators, not even FBI directors, are above the law." At that, Van Hollen stirred. He adjusted his microphone. "So you're saying the image was leaked deliberately?" Patel shook his head once. "No, but I am saying it wasn't leaked by us." That line landed hard. The air shifted. Senator Gillibrand interrupted. "Do you know who leaked it?" Patel didn't hesitate. "Not yet. But I intend to find out." Then he turned directly to Van Hollen. Not confrontational, not defiant, just focused. "Senator," he said, "you've made strong statements about accountability. I hope you'll welcome it now." Van Hollen narrowed his eyes. "Director Patel, let's not pretend this hearing is about me." "No," Patel replied. "It's about trust. And that trust is broken because justice only seems to matter when it fits the narrative." Silence again. But not the awkward kind. The kind that says something just shifted. The kind that comes right before the real fight begins. Senator Van Hollen wasted no time trying to reassert control. "Director Patel," he began, "let me remind you, this committee called this hearing not to stage political theater, but to investigate whether your department crossed a constitutional line." Patel remained expressionless. Van Hollen leaned forward, voice rising just slightly. "You detained a sitting federal judge without public charges. That's not just unprecedented, it's dangerous." Kash answered calmly. "What's dangerous is allowing power to protect itself." There was a brief pause. Then Van Hollen reached into a folder of his own and produced a printed email chain. "This," he said, holding it up, "is an internal memo from your office, dated 3 days before Judge Dugan's arrest. It mentions a media strategy. Would you care to explain that?" Patel didn't blink. "Yes. It's called transparency." "Transparency," Van Hollen repeated, scoffing, "because from where I'm sitting it looks more like media manipulation." Patel finally leaned in. "Senator, your office gave 3 interviews this morning. You stood on national television and claimed this arrest was an attack on democracy. Is that not media strategy? A ripple moved through the room. Van Hollen's posture tightened. He fired back. Don't deflect, Director. The public deserves to know what led to this arrest. What exactly did Judge Dugan do? Patel sat still for a beat too long. Then he said, "Let me ask the committee something. If a judge altered rulings post-verdict, if someone in her chambers was caught redacting official records, what should I have done?" The room fell into stunned silence. Van Hollen's mouth opened, but no words came. Senator Cruz broke the pause. "Are you saying there was tampering inside her courtroom?" "I'm saying we found evidence," Patel replied. "Enough to justify the action. Enough to keep going." Van Hollen jumped in. Louder now. "Then why didn't you release that to the public?" "Because it's not finished. Because I don't run trials on Twitter." A few people in the gallery laughed quietly. Patel continued, "Senator, you say this hearing isn't about theater, but you called it before asking a single question about the evidence." Van Hollen's face turned a shade darker. "You're playing games." "No," Patel said, steady as ever. "I'm ending them." He turned his attention back to the full committee. "You want to talk about crossing lines? Let's talk about the people who knew what was happening in that courthouse and did nothing. Let's talk about who Judge Dugan was connected to. And let's ask why no one ever questioned it until now." The senators exchanged glances. Patel sat back, hands folded. The power in the room had shifted again, and Van Hollen, who came in as the accuser, suddenly looked like the one being cornered. The room had grown still. No shuffling papers, no whispered side conversations, just silence, and the faint hum a nearby camera lens, adjusting its focus. Senator Marcia Blackburn spoke next. "Director Patel," she said carefully, "you just mentioned connections. What kind of connections are we talking about?" Patel didn't hesitate. "Judge Dugan was in frequent contact with two nonprofit organizations," he said, "both of which received federal grants, both of which have board members with direct financial interests in active court decisions." A murmur swept the chamber again, this time louder. Blackburn raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying she ruled in favor of organizations that paid her?" "I'm saying," Patel replied, "that we found patterns. Decisions made in chambers that consistently aligned with the financial interests of her associates." Van Hollen interjected, now visibly irritated. "Director, let me remind you that implication is not evidence." "I agree," Patel nodded. "Which is why we didn't arrest her based on implication. We arrested her based on audit trails, intercepted communications, and sworn affidavits." He paused, then added, "And we're not done." Senator Kennedy leaned forward now, his southern drawl cutting through the tension. "Just how far does this thing go, Mr. Patel?" Patel opened his folder this time and slid a page toward the clerk. "The department traced money transfers from a DC-based consulting firm tied to Judge Dugan's brother-in-law. That same firm appears in at least 4 other investigations involving suspicious judicial rulings. Some of those judges currently sit on the federal bench." Van Hollen slammed his hand lightly on the table. "This is reckless. You're casting a shadow over the entire judiciary." Patel remained still. "No, Senator. I'm shining a light." The tension snapped. Senator Klobuchar jumped in, trying to redirect. "Let's be clear. Are you accusing other federal judges of misconduct?" "I'm saying we've uncovered a pattern worth investigating," Patel said. "But that's what this hearing was supposed to be about. Facts. Instead, it's turned into a defense of appearances." Senator Hawley leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "Sounds to me like we're scratching the surface of something bigger than Judge Dugan." Van Hollen tried to pivot. "Let's talk about your media appearances last year. You went on a conservative podcast and called the justice system compromised. Isn't that a dangerous statement coming from the head of the FBI?" Patel gave a faint smile. "It was dangerous because it was true. You're undermining public trust." "No, Senator," he said, "I'm rebuilding it." A pause. Then slowly he looked across the entire panel. "You can't fix a system by pretending it's fine." There it was. Not a defense, not a rebuttal, a warning. One that landed harder than any headline ever could. And the hearing, once meant to humiliate him, was starting to feel like something entirely different, like a reckoning. The hearing broke for recess, but the real conversations were just beginning. Staffers rushed out with phones pressed to their ears. Reporters whispered in corners. And senators? They didn't leave the chamber. They circled. Van Hollen leaned over to speak with Klobuchar. His tone was hushed, but his body language screamed frustration. Meanwhile, Senator Hawley moved toward Patel, nodding once before walking past. Blackburn stayed seated, flipping through her notes, her pen tapping lightly against the desk. Patel remained exactly where he was, still calm, waiting. 10 minutes later, the senators returned. The chair called the session back into order. Van Hollen cleared his throat. Director Patel, I want to return to your claim that Judge Dugan's arrest was part of a broader investigation. Are there more warrants, more judges under scrutiny? Patel answered without blinking. That information is sealed. But yes. That landed like a dropped hammer. The room tightened again. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse jumped in. So what you're telling this committee, on the record, is that there is an ongoing investigation into multiple federal judges. I'm telling you, Patel said, that integrity doesn't stop at a black robe. Van Hollen's voice dropped half an octave. Director, if what you're implying is true, then you've just declared war on the judiciary. Patel's tone never changed. No, Senator. I'm holding it accountable. Then Senator Cruz spoke up. Do you have evidence that connects any of these judges to political actors, lobbyists, legislators? Patel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened his folder again and this time pulled out a document. I have communication logs between Judge Dugan's office and a legal advisory firm that employs 2 former congressional staffers. One of them worked for this committee. The room went cold. Van Hollen's pen slipped from his hand. Blackburn froze mid-note. Camera's weird. The clerk stood and quickly approached to retrieve the document. But Patel held it back. This isn't for the public record. Not yet. And I will, Patel said, to the proper investigators. Not to a committee trying to script its own narrative. That line stung. The hearing had shifted again. Not just tension now, but exposure. Real stakes. Names. Senators no longer looked comfortable. They looked nervous, because what started as an attempt to embarrass the FBI director was unraveling into something much bigger, something that touched the very people asking the questions. Patel leaned forward one last time. I didn't come here to defend an arrest, he said. I came here to tell you this. Corruption isn't partisan. It's just been protected by power for too long. And with that he sat back again. No drama. Just truth, delivered with surgical precision. And everyone in the room knew they weren't dealing with a scandal. They were staring at a system cracking from the inside. By the time the hearing resumed for its afternoon session, every major outlet had picked up the story. CNN led with Bombshell Patel claims judicial network under investigation. Fox ran with Corruption Crackdown, FBI Director drops names on Capitol Hill. And social media? It exploded. But inside the chamber, Kash Patel wasn't finished. He reached into his folder one more time, this time pulling out a sealed manila envelope. He held it up just long enough for the cameras to catch it. Before this hearing ends, he said, this will be handed to the Inspector General's office. Inside are statements from 2 whistleblowers, both former staff members in Judge Dugan's chambers. A jolt of energy moved through the room. Patel placed the envelope on the desk in front of him gently, deliberately. Senator Gillibrand leaned in, her voice quieter now. What do these statements allege? That Judge Dugan altered sentencing recommendations, Patel said. That she accepted briefings from outside consultants, and that she instructed staff to scrub language from digital case files post-verdict. A few senators looked down at their notes. Others didn't know where to look. Van Hollen didn't even bother hiding his frustration now. This is a spectacle. You're using unverified testimony to undermine public institutions. No, Patel said. I'm documenting why public trust already collapsed. He tapped the envelope labeled. 2 people risked their careers to tell the truth. They came to me because they said internal reporting channels led nowhere. They said complaints were buried, and when they asked questions they were reassigned. Senator Kennedy asked, "Are these staffers named?" "They are," Patel nodded. "And they're willing to testify." Van Hollen nearly shouted, "Then why not bring them forward here?" "Because," Patel replied, "this committee didn't ask to hear them. It asked to see me." The jab hit hard. Senator Cruz couldn't hold back a smirk. "Sounds like the wrong witness is sitting in that chair." The gallery laughed nervously. Even the stenographer paused a beat. Patel continued, "The whistleblowers weren't the first, by the way. We've traced nearly a dozen informal complaints across 3 federal districts involving similar behavior. You want to know what all of them have in common?" No one answered. They were dismissed quietly, without escalation, without consequence. Gillibrand frowned. "Do you have proof?" "Internal memos," Patel said. "Unredacted logs. We're compiling everything for federal review." He paused, then added, "And we're not the only agency doing so." That last line hung in the air. Blackburn narrowed her eyes. "Who else is involved?" Patel offered a small, measured answer. "Let's just say the rot didn't go unnoticed." The committee had entered unfamiliar territory now. This was no longer about Patel's conduct. It was about who looked the other way and who didn't. And for the first time all day, Van Hollen didn't have anything to say. Not because he'd run out of questions, but because he finally understood where this was going, and who might be standing in the way. Kash Patel hadn't moved from his seat all day, but now, the way he sat, straighter, more focused, signaled something was coming. He placed one final document on the table. Not a sealed envelope, not a classified memo, just a single printed name on a sheet of paper. He didn't say it aloud. He didn't need to. Senator Josh Hawley read it first. His eyebrows lifted, and he turned toward Van Hollen. The room shifted again. Blackburn leaned in to glance at the paper. Her eyes narrowed, then looked sharply toward the Democratic side of the chamber. The name, a sitting senior judge. Not just any judge, but a longtime appointee known for championing judicial reform and ethics oversight. Van Hollen spoke slowly. "You're not seriously suggesting he's involved?" Patel looked him directly in the eye. "No, Senator, I'm stating it as a matter of record." The chamber went dead quiet. Patel continued. "Financial records show Judge Dugan received payments from a legal trust, partially managed by this individual's office. That trust funneled money to consulting groups that appeared in over a dozen case files where conflicts of interest were never disclosed." Senator Whitehouse interjected, "This is outrageous. You're accusing a respected jurist of laundering influence through a trust fund." "I'm presenting data," Patel said. "Receipts, timelines, and direct overlaps between rulings and final activity." Gillibrand looked visibly disturbed. "Have charges been filed?" "Not yet," Patel said, "but a sealed inquiry is underway." Van Hollen snapped. "Then why mention it here?" "Because," Patel answered, "this committee called me to explain an arrest. But the arrest is just the first thread. I'm showing you the rest of the sweater." The metaphor landed harder than anyone expected. Senator Kennedy scratched his chin. "You're saying this wasn't just one judge gone rogue?" "I'm saying it never is," Patel said. Van Hollen pushed back again. "This kind of disclosure undermines public faith in the judiciary. You're making this institution bleed on national television." Patel leaned forward, calm and clear. "No, Senator, it was already bleeding. I'm just showing people where the wound is." No one spoke for several seconds. Senator Hawley finally said, "If what you're claiming is true, then this goes beyond the DOJ." "It does," Patel nodded. "That's why I briefed a senior oversight council, and that's why this isn't going away." Van Hollen looked down at his notes, then back at the name on the paper. His hands fidgeted for the first time. Because this wasn't just a political opponent making noise anymore. This was a career official delivering proof. And one name had changed everything. Not because it was unexpected, but because it wasn't. Everyone in that room already knew who it was. They just never thought someone would dare say it out loud. The tone of the room had officially changed. The confidence with which senators once fired off questions was gone, replaced now by cautious phrasing, strategic pivots, and subtle glances toward aides and cameras. They weren't trying to expose Patel anymore. They were trying to survive the fallout. Van Hollen attempted to regain the floor. Director Patel, your comments today have sparked a serious concern across this chamber. But let's not forget, this is a hearing about process, about overreach. Let's get back to the basics. Who authorized the arrest of a sitting judge? Patel didn't flinch. It was a coordinated decision made between the Bureau, the Department of Justice, and the U.S. Marshal Service. Then where was the oversight? Van Hollen pressed. Why wasn't this committee informed in advance? Patel tilted his head slightly. Because no one informs congressional committees before a sealed warrant is executed. That's not oversight. That's interference. Senator Klobuchar spoke next, softer this time. You've made some serious claims today, Director. Do you understand the implications of what you're doing? Yes, he said. I do. That's why I didn't come empty-handed. He gestured toward the documents already submitted. I brought records, testimony, digital trails. I brought facts. What this hearing does with them is up to you. Van Hollen leaned forward. Let me ask you plainly. Do you believe there's corruption in the judiciary? I don't believe it, Patel replied. I've seen it. That line sucked the oxygen out of the room. It wasn't hyperbole. It was conviction. Senator Cruz followed up. Director, have any of the individuals named in your evidence reached out to members of this committee? Van Hollen bristled. That's speculative and inappropriate, but Patel answered anyway. Yes. Heads turned sharply. Patel continued. We've seen call logs, meeting schedules, even text messages. One of the nonprofit executives linked to the payments met with a sitting senator's chief of staff just days before Judge Dugan's ruling in a financial regulation case. Van Hollen slammed his hand on the table. Not hard, but enough to demand attention. This is exactly the kind of political smear campaign that damages the very foundation of our democracy. Patel didn't respond right away, then calmly, only if it's false. The silence returned, but this time it felt like something had settled. A new reality. The committee had started the day trying to put Patel on the defensive. Now they were the ones just trying to keep up. Senator Blackburn leaned toward her mic. Director Patel, what do you need from this committee right now? Patel looked around the room. Two things, he said. A formal review of the judicial appointment vetting process, and independent oversight of court-affiliated nonprofits. That's where the trail starts. Van Hollen opened his mouth to object but didn't. Because deep down, everyone knew this wasn't about politics anymore. It was about survival. And no one was sure who the next name on that list would be. The hearing had dragged into the early evening, but no one dared to leave. Phones buzzed, cameras rolled. Even the interns had stopped taking notes. They were just watching now, eyes locked on Kash Patel, and Patel still poised, still in control. Senator Klobuchar attempted to change the mood. Director Patel, this committee doesn't deal in conspiracy theories. If you're alleging criminal conduct, then bring the evidence to the appropriate authorities. I already have, Patel said. That's why this hearing feels so uncomfortable. It wasn't said with arrogance. It was said with certainty. Van Hollen tried to reframe again. You've spoken about corruption, about connections, but what you haven't explained is motive. Why would a respected judge like Hannah Dugan risk everything? Patel gave a small nod. Power, he said, and the belief that no one would ever question it. He paused just long enough for the words to land. She was protected by silence, by access, by a system that punishes whistleblowers and rewards insiders who play the game. Klobuchar tried again. Then where's the line, Director? At what point does your pursuit of justice become a threat to judicial independence? Patel leaned in, his voice quieter now. The line is truth. And for years that line has been blurred. Not by investigators but by those who wear robes and think it makes them untouchable. That was the moment. The moment the room turned. Not because of anger or politics or panic, but because the truth had hit too close. Senator Hawley followed up, more serious now. What happens next? Patel answered without pause. We continue. We trace the networks. We protect the whistleblowers. And we let the public see what's been hidden for too long. Blackburn added, and the names. They'll come out, he said. Not from me. From the evidence. That's how this has to work. Van Hollen sighed, exasperated. So you're just going to keep dropping bombs and expect us to sort through the wreckage? No, Patel replied. I'm asking you to stop pretending the wreckage isn't already here. The sentence echoed, not just across the microphones, but in the eyes of the staffers watching from the gallery, because by now no one could deny it. This wasn't Patel tearing something down. This was Patel pulling back the curtain, and behind it, a system that had protected itself for too long. The final stretch of the hearing felt more like a confession booth than a courtroom. No one shouted anymore. No one grandstanded. Even the usually fiery Senator Van Hollen sat back in his chair, arms crossed, tapping a pen against his pad. Not out of strategy, but out of habit. There was nothing left to deflect. Patel had done what no one expected. He hadn't come with slogans. He'd come with names, numbers, documents. And silence had become the loudest answer in the room. Senator Kennedy was the first to speak now, his voice unusually measured. Director Patel, I've been here a long time, seen a lot of hearings. Most of them don't amount to much. But this ain't normal. Patel nodded. It wasn't meant to be. Kennedy continued. You just accused elements of the judiciary of being compromised. You suggested members of this committee may have unknowingly or otherwise enabled it. That's not just explosive, that's historic. Patel didn't blink. And necessary. Senator Gillibrand exhaled deeply and looked around. Then we'll need to open a formal inquiry, she said, glancing at Van Hollen, who didn't respond. We already have one, Patel said. This hearing just gave it daylight. Blackburn turned to the chairman. Are we prepared to vote on issuing subpoenas? More silence. Then, Van Hollen finally. We'll need to confer. No objection, no outrage, just delay. Patel folded his papers. I'm submitting everything I brought today to the Oversight Archive. You'll have copies within the hour. I'd also recommend you review internal communication protocols. Someone in this building leaked the Dugan photo before her arrest had even concluded. That bombshell landed with little reaction, but not because it didn't matter, because no one wanted to be the first to react. Patel stood slowly, respectfully. I came here because this committee demanded answers. I gave them. What you do with them now is up to you. And for once, no one followed him with accusations. No one challenged his facts. Because every senator in that room understood, on some level they had all ignored something for far too long, not necessarily out of malice, sometimes just out of convenience. But silence too can be guilt. And on that day, no one walked out of that room the same. Least of all, Chris Van Hollen. The hearing was over, but the real story was just beginning. Within hours, headlines flooded every screen in the country, not just snippets of the Judge Dugan arrest, but the full narrative, the connections, the financial trails, the names. And most importantly, the silence. Director Kash Patel left the Capitol through the back hallway, refusing interviews, ignoring cameras. He didn't need a press conference. The hearing was the press conference. Inside the FBI, teams had already begun combing through flagged case files. A quiet task force had been assembled, its members hand-picked, its mission clear: follow the evidence, wherever it goes. By morning, 2 federal judges had recused themselves from ongoing trials. One nonprofit group had issued a statement denying wrongdoing. And a staffer linked to the original leak of the Dugan photo had quietly resigned. But what stuck with everyone, especially those who watched the hearing live, was the expression on Senator Chris Van Hollen's face as Patel walked out. It wasn't anger, it was recognition. Because he knew the institutions they once thought untouchable weren't. For months, Patel had warned of systemic erosion of integrity, compromised not by enemies but by insiders who mistook immunity for justice. And now, those warnings had faces, signatures, and wire transfers. At a late-night meeting, several senators reconvened behind closed doors, not to strategize spin, but to consider reform. We can't stop it now, one aide whispered to her chief. The public's already seen too much. Across the country, pundits argued. Some called Patel a whistleblower, with a badge, others a reckless disruptor. But for those who listened closely, something deeper had shifted. Trust, not in institutions that was already broken, but in the idea that someone finally was willing to name names, stand alone and say what no one else dared. As the news cycle churned, as networks scrambled to catch up, as political careers hung in the balance, one truth settled quietly across Washington. He wasn't finished.